So let me get this shared really quickly. All right. So to start this out, this is going to be the first meeting of quite a few that are going to come in this series. But I want to start out by talking about just what this Flashpoint Taiwan is actually about. If whether you saw it on LinkedIn, or whether you saw it on Instagram or the other various channels that it's been shared on. Just to provide a little bit of clarification about what Flashpoint Taiwan is and what it is that we've been cooking up between all of our different pages the last couple of months. So it is an article series that is going to lead up to the culminating event, which is going to be a war game in the Washington, D.C. area. Now, this article series, it started this previous week. If you're logging in right now, if you can just mute your mics as you come in. We started this previous week with the first article release that was done by Sinotalk, who is a previous Marine Corps intel analyst, and he is since gotten out of the Marine Corps, but has a big focus on China and the South China Sea, just Indo-Pacific in general. Runs a pretty prominent Instagram page that puts out a lot of content. So he's going to be developing the article series, and he's publishing it basically the following week after an article drops. We will log in here, we'll have a standing chat and do these classes.
Oh, that's cool.
And then Sally and I are sisters. My best friend Kendra.
Whoever that is, please mute your mic.
Yeah, I don't know if I can mute her mic for her or not. I'm trying to see. Yeah, I don't think so. Okay. So the article series, it's starting out with the overview, which is tonight's that we're going to be discussing right now. And then we're going to have a few other ones that are going to come out in the following weeks. So the next one up on the chopping block is going to be terrain and weather, talk force disposition, logistics, and C2 and political will. And for each one of those, we'll have a Zoom conference that will get together and we can talk through some of the things as you would have seen in this first article. If you got a chance to read it at the very end, there's kind of like a thought-provoking question, which is something that we'll discuss during this period as well. So in addition to that, obviously at the end, the culminating event is going to be that war game for those that can participate. It's going to be in the DC area. So anybody in the national capital area or people that can travel want to come out to it. It's going to be a 3-day event and it's going to take place December 8th, 9th, and 10th. Now, the 8th is a Friday and it's going to basically be in the afternoon, evening time. So it's going to be just from 5 p.m. to 9 p.m. That's going to be kind of the opening ceremony, if you will, kind of just introduce everybody to the concept, a lot of background information, get everybody spun up, get people broken out into their different groups, and pretty much get everybody a good situational awareness of what the next couple of days are going to look like. And then a lot of the actual war game and simulation, crisis simulation is going to happen on the 10th or the 9th and the 10th. So it's meant to simulate both military and the political aspects that would occur during basically a PRC invasion on the very first day, kind of leading into those initial actions of an invasion on the island of Taiwan. So it should attract people from both the military community as well as those of just an interest in international relations and things of the such. You can sign up as a participant or as a spectator, and there's really no, you don't have to have any kind of pre-qualifications to get either one of those spots if you're interested in it and if you're willing to come forward and work on it and educate yourself on the topic, read the articles, participate, then we want to have you. So please feel free to send this out to other people. Although you all are interested, please feel free to shoot this out to people who you think would benefit from this and who would be interested in it as well. We'd love to have them. We'd love to have this conversation going over the next couple months to generate some more interest as well. So we'll kind of hop right into this class and the figure. And I mean, I use the term class loosely, but the way that I kind of structure this is just to give a brief overview. I just laid out a timeline, basically a timeline starting at the beginning of the century, essentially, and moving up into linking up with where the article picked up, which is the article basically picks up at the end of the Chinese Civil War, and then going into current day. And the timeline portion is going to be relatively short. I'm just going to talk through some of the big wicket points of, inflection points in history when it comes to Taiwan and China, and then we'll kind of jump into a few questions that we'll talk about the questions posed at the end of our article and what people think about that. And then if we get Sino Talk on the line, then we can discuss a few more things as well. See if we can get the slideshow going. So I'm big on visual learning. I teach a ton of Marines every day, and so I know one thing that people love is to see things visually to have it make sense. And I think a timeline is one of those things that we could really use to lay out some of this stuff and make logical sense of the flow of how things have kind of transpired over the last few years. So 1912, end of the Qing Dynasty, and the Republic of China is founded. Now, just a decade later, the founding of the CCP takes place. The Chinese Communist Party is still the naming standard that we know of today. Now, 1921 timeframe, a lot of different political movements are happening around this time. You know, a nice nod to pop culture reference that's out right now. For anybody that's gone and seen Oppenheimer, great movie. That paints out, you know, the same exact thing happening, right? A lot of communist movements happening all around the world, whether it's in Europe, whether it's in America, even in China, obviously, with the CCP founding and getting some roots right now in the early 20s. So that initial decade, there's a lot of small things that are happening. And for those that are history buffs, you know, I understand that I'm just doing some very broad wave tops. But a lot of things are happening, some minor skirmishes. But really what leads into the Civil War is that the ROC, who is at this time being led by Chiang Kai-shek, they kind of hit a boiling point after a bit of systematic purging that's taken place between the ROC government and the CCP. So you know, numbers and estimates will kind of vary depending on what source you're looking at, but somewhere around 5,000 people are purged that are confirmed to be Chinese Communist Party members. And that's from Chiang Kai-shek and the ROC, and that kind of hits a boiling point. We enter a period of a civil war in China, and it starts to go on like that for a few years. 1934, the Chinese Communist Party is essentially surrounded for all intents and purposes. They're surrounded by the ROC army, and they end up going on what's called the Long March. Now, the Long March is a 6,000-mile march in which it became like a galvanizing moment for a lot of the CCP. So this is a 6,000-mile march through China. As you can imagine, they're going through a lot of very rural areas. They're seeing a lot of the population. They're interacting with them. And so this is kind of actually building a little bit of steam for the movement at the time frame. And it kind of comes to help them out a little bit later on down the road. Now, this same time frame, everybody knows that Imperial Japan's kind of expanding their borders, expanding their reach, and starting to, you know, get out there, and that affects China as well. This kind of creates a weird dynamic in which the Nationalist Party, which is the ROC Party, kind of comes together, even though Chiang Kai-shek doesn't want to. He's urged to kind of join forces with the CCP to fight a common enemy, and that common enemy being Imperial Japan. Now, fast forward a decade, we know end of World War II, Japan loses all of its territories. One of those territories that they had control of over that time frame being Taiwan. So a couple of other little things, you know, Red Armies renamed the PLA, which is what we know it as today, which is the People's Liberation Army, falls under the CCP and under the PRC, which is founded at the end of the Chinese Civil War. So immediately following the Second World War, you know, the common enemy of Imperial Japan is now gone, and China kind of goes back into that Civil War period. And it doesn't really last too long before the CCP comes out on top, and they essentially push the ROC government and any of those ROC loyalists, nationalists off of the island, and they have to relocate down to Taiwan if they essentially want to survive. So now we get this period where the PRC is actually founded, the People's Republic of China, which is what we know mainland China as today. So not too long after, we know the Korean War kind of kicks off. This is right after Mao Zedong and the PRC or the CCP has taken power. Now, one of the things that I like to kind of point out, I think is really interesting is some of the dynamics that are actually happening around the Soviet and a lot of the communist powers at this time frame. Depending on how much you read about it, for some people
I'm not in that. You want to show it to
very
me?
educated on it.
Want to add me to that?
Hey,
I'll
if you
just
guys
look.
like them,
Yeah, yeah.
you
So anyway,
please.
this is just like some guy wrote this about
Whoever's talking right now, mute your mic.
Ollie Ballinger. He's cool. He does geo and research at University College London. But yeah, you just feed it a bunch of images of people and it will extract their face and determine who is most connected to the other people. Anyway, privacy is dead. That's my thesis.
All right, I can't find it. Looks
I
like
don't know if you find a way to use it. It might be fun.
right. Okay, there it is. You just made it. All right. So 1950, Korean War kicks off. Again, one thing I like to just throw out there for those that might not know a lot about this period in time. When I was a little bit more ignorant to the topic, I just kind of figured, all the Soviet or all the communist nations were kind of on the same page and were really just fighting the same battle at this time frame. But turns out there's a lot of animosity amongst the different nations at this time frame, with the Soviet Union obviously being the superpower in the communist world at this time. China, kind of a fledgling, being that they just came out of the Chinese Civil War, and then North Korea, again, being, even more of a fledgling, even though they had been around for a couple of years at this point. Much smaller, much less capable than China at this point, and certainly in population as well. So one of the things is, this is a time frame where Kim Il-sung is kind of, he's kind of going to Stalin, and he's requesting permission to really get his blessing for him to invade South Korea and kind of start that war. North Korea being a little bit of an annoyance to China and to Mao Zedong at this time frame, more so because of the proximity that they have to China. It becomes more of a problem for China than it is for the Soviet Union. Now, at this time frame, Mao actually has the mindset where he wants to finish off kind of what has been started by the Chinese Civil War. He still wants to kind of pursue the ROC government and pursue what he sees as the defectors at this point. He wants to kind of go into Taiwan. So he's not really a fan of the fact that the Korean War is about to kick off, that North Korea is about to invade the South, but at the same time, he does see it as an opportunity to kind of finish this off. But that kind of gets curtailed when the Korean War does kick off, and the writing's on the wall that this could be a potential issue for China and Taiwan as well, with the U.S. having backed the ROC government and not being very happy about the spread of communism coming to China. They end up sailing a fleet over there to kind of block off the Taiwan Strait to ensure there's no issues that are going to be popping up there at the same time that this war is kicking off now in the Korean Peninsula. So for those that haven't read On China by Henry Kissinger, I would recommend that. Pretty good book. There's a good chapter about this time frame that really paints out a lot of the back and forth between Mao and Stalin, and that's pretty interesting to kind of read through what that relationship was like, or that lack of relationship was like, however you want to categorize it. So 1954, we kind of married up with the article at this point, because this is where we're starting to get into the Taiwan Strait crisis and a lot of the back and forth between Taiwan and China as we know it today, and really what the article picked up on and what Sinotalk was able to write about. So getting into 1954, the first Taiwan Strait crisis began in 1954, and in the article, Sino paints out a few of the different factors. He said most importantly was China's testing of the Eisenhower administration and their commitment to actually defending Taiwan. Second factor that he painted out was the United States publicly debating on the possibility of signing some sort of mutual defense treaty with the Republic of China or the ROC government down in Taiwan, and the United States creation of a Southeast Asia Treaty Organization. So for all these different reasons, Mao and China they're really trying to test the administration's resolve and their ability or their want to try and create some of these things that they obviously don't want. And so we get the first Taiwan crisis that kind of pops up at this point in time. Now, moving forward just a little bit more, we have the second Taiwan Strait crisis, 1958, and then we're starting to get to a period of time where a lot of things are starting to happen in the early 70s. And I know I'm kind of skipping over some things just for the essence of time, but hoping most people have read through the article, because I know he does take a little bit of time on each one of these. But 1971, I want to highlight a couple of things that don't get brought up in the article that are of some relevance. So the ROC is expelled from the UN. Now, this is, again, a time where a lot of pretty important things are starting to happen. So 1971, that happens. 1972, we have the Shanghai Communique. And with that, this is where the One China policy is first laid out. Now, a lot of people that are familiar with the topic that we're talking about today are going to be familiar with the One China policy. But for those that aren't, the One China policy places the United States in having a stance that it basically acknowledges that Chinese on either side of the Taiwan Strait maintains that there is but one China and that Taiwan is a part of that China, and that the United States does not challenge that position either. Now, this is pretty important because this is something that the United States to this day still publicly says that they abide by and that they recognize that there is but one China and that this one China policy is still standing and in place. That's pretty important for a lot of reasons, not least of which that every time that something happens where Taiwan is kind of publicly recognized as its own sovereign nation, that just is a blatant, disregard or contradiction to the One China policy. But you have to remember what the time frame is like at this time when Richard Nixon is going over and he's meeting Mao Zedong in the early 70s, and they're coming to this kind of agreement that the United States, still abides by. We're in the heat of the Cold War. This is a pretty strategic move to get some kind of agreements with China that, in a sense, weakens the overall communist nations and their resolve, and obviously the Soviet Union being the most important in all of that. Now, this leads into a couple other things that are happening in the 1970s. 1979, the Sino-Vietnamese War comes in on the heels of the Vietnam War, of the end of the Vietnam War for the United States. China has a small war with Vietnam, and really the defining thing that comes out of that is that China's leader at the time, the PRC's leader at the time, is a man by the name of Deng Xiaoping, and he sees that the PRC, or the PLA, the People's Liberation Army, doesn't fare too well in that war, and that kind of lights a little bit of a fire under their ass to kind of start modernizing the PLA a little bit more rapidly and make them more of a world-class military, if you will. Now, obviously, in the coming decades, that kind of picks up at different time points, but this is kind of one of those first realizations that they come to. Now, before I even get into the 1995 crisis, I just want to highlight a couple of things that come out in 1979 as well. So basically, after President Jimmy Carter, the administration recognizes the PRC. Congress passes the Taiwan Relations Act in 1979, and this is to protect the significant U.S. security and commercial interests that are in Taiwan. And the TRA also provides a framework for continued relations in the absence of official diplomatic ties. It sets out a lot of different things that basically allows Congress and allows the United States to have some type of relationship with Taiwan. But at the same time, this is the same time frame where the Mutual Defense Treaty that was signed back in 1955 after the first Taiwan Strait crisis with Taiwan, that comes to an end. And so that ran from 1955 to 1980, and basically the termination of the treaty, when it ended, it essentially ended that there would be it kind of added on to the one China policy and what was happening around that time frame. So a lot of things happened 1970s, 1980s, but it's relatively quiet time frame as far as like any kind of actual conflict between the second and then now the third Taiwan Strait crisis that comes up here in 1995. So a lot of people will be a little bit more familiar with the third Taiwan Strait crisis just because it is a little bit more recent history for most of us. So this happens when Taiwan's president ends up making a trip back to his alma mater to give a speech at Cornell, and we grant him that visa to come through the United States and visit and whatnot. That creates a pretty big uproar by the PRC, and we end up sailing a fleet of Navy vessels into the Taiwan Strait as a show of force to kind of stop that. Depending on who you talk to, they would say this is a pretty big inflection point as well, because this is kind of one of those triggering moments where the PRC sees again that they don't have the military strength, they don't have the military might to really face the United States on that front. And again, this could be one of those periods in time where it kind of lights a fire under their butt to start to modernize a little bit quicker and take it a little bit more seriously. So now we're starting to get into the more recent time frame. Now, a lot of things are still happening that I'm kind of breezing over just for the essence of time. But we get to 2015, and the KMT is a party that is in Taiwan. They actually go and they do a meeting with the PRC, so with Xi Jinping in China. And this is the very first time that a president or a leader of Taiwan is meeting with the leader of the PRC since the end of the Chinese Civil War. So it's pretty big moment. And this is 2015. Now things change pretty quickly after this because a lot of people in Taiwan were taken by a little bit of surprise that this was happening. And I would contend that a lot of people did not like that because pretty quickly during the next Taiwanese election, which is literally that very next year, all the votes swing over to the DPP, which is the alternate party to the KMT. And then President Tsai comes into power in 2016, and their stance with President Tsai and the DPP is pretty different than the KMT's, in which the KMT is kind of looking to have some kind of relationship with the Chinese and be willing to kind of work on some things and just be a little bit more lenient and willing to work. The DPP is less so, not that they want to necessarily not have a relationship, but that they are much more based on maintaining the sovereignty and really the independence of Taiwan at the end of the day. And a lot of people in Taiwan obviously got behind that, which is why President Tsai was also reelected again. And she's coming to the end of her second term right now, which at the end of the second term, she will no longer be eligible to run again. It's a two-term system, just like the United States. So she will end up leaving. And right now, Taiwan is in the midst of their election cycle right now, which is actually, I believe, going to happen in November. There's a great article or a great podcast actually that was hosted by one of the multiple podcasts that CSIS has. So the Center for Strategic International Studies, they have a China Power podcast. They posted a podcast on August 31st, which they interviewed members from the KMT party as well as a representative from the DPP party. And so they started to talk about some of the stances that each one of their party members were running on. And so if anybody's interested in kind of what those politics look like over in China right now, over in Taiwan right now, as they are going into this election cycle, I'd highly encourage that you listen to the China Power podcast that was published on August 31st. It's a good one. So right now we're kind of at that point in time where, let me just fast forward this podcast or this PowerPoint. Yeah, so we're pretty much at that time frame where things started to erode 2016 because the PRC and the CCP is very against President Tsai and the DPP and everything that they essentially stand for. in addition to that, obviously we have the Trump presidency, where immediately when he comes into office, he's questioning the one China policy. So a lot of different things are kind of feeding into that. So we have like a pretty gradual descendance in the cross-strait relations, as well as the international relations between the United States and the CCP and PRC. So it kind of brings us up to current day. And one thing to note, with the fact that Taiwan is going into an election cycle, obviously a lot of people cite that as, it's a pretty important time frame, because if the KMT wins, obviously we can expect that that's going to be, China's going to count that as a little bit of a win, because they're a little bit more, they're able to favor them a little bit more. If the DPP wins, that's kind of, everybody already knows that's going to be a continuance of what the DPP has done in the last 8 years. And some people actually see that as possibly a little bit more dangerous, because Vice President, I think it's President Lai, he actually made a comment not too long ago that he can envision himself winning the presidency and walking into the White House. And that caught him a lot of flack. A lot of people, started to, reach out for some clarification as to what he meant. Because one of the standing, essentially, rules of the one China policy is that no senior leadership from the United States will meet directly with a president of Taiwan. And so him even making that comment that he sees himself walking into the White House was a very hot topic in Taiwan. He had to kind of walk his party staff, everybody had to kind of walk those comments back and say, oh no, he was just saying that, figuratively he envisions it, or it's just him saying that we'd get closer to the United States kind of thing. But all kind of interesting things about what's just happening right now over there. So this kind of brings us to the fourth Taiwan Strait crisis, 2022, when then Speaker of the House Nancy Pelosi makes her visit. And I'm sure all of us in this chat room right now are very familiar with what that looked like. We all saw everything happening. The buildup for that was extremely intense. When it actually happened, it was supposed to be a 3-day trip or something like that. In the beginning, it ends up just becoming a few hours, like a stopover. And even that had some pretty drastic consequences, where we see the PLA conducting, strikes of ballistic missiles out into basically areas around around Taiwan in the ocean and whatnot, kind of bracketing the island. Honestly, we see just a ton of military reaction, a huge escalation in the incursions, from the flights. I mean, flight incursions just go up drastically. And then in 2023, we see this happen again, maybe not on the same scale, but obviously another pretty big crisis when we meet again, where our speaker meets again with some of the Taiwan government. So we can kind of see anytime that this happens now, whether this is going to be a regular occurrence where our leadership is going to start meeting with their leadership, we can expect that these kind of things are going to be happening. And this is almost now the new status quo when it comes to this. So this leads us into basically the end of that overview, that timeline overview. And I wouldn't mind getting into talking with some of you all. I was able to read some of the feedback that some of you all provided about the question that's posed at the end of the article. So I'd love to get in there, but just before I do that, let me turn, if I can figure out how to do this. Yeah. Do we have Sino Talk in the chat by chance? I just want to see if he's in here and wants to give any comments to anything before we move on.
I'm here. One of the major, I guess one of the major things to point out is, as you pointed out in your brief, that this is a microcosm of the wider Cold War. However, people should realize that there's a reason why there was a gap between the second and third Taiwan crisis, and the reason why is because the Sino-Soviet split happened around it started in 1958, but accelerated a couple of years after that. And it was precisely because of the second Taiwan Strait crisis, whenever the Soviet Union pressured Mao to backing down. Not only that, but just the mere fact that at that time, Stalin died and Khrushchev, or I believe it was Khrushchev, was in power, and Mao seen him as the fake successor to Stalin in terms of communism, and that's where you started to see the split occur, because before that, when you had two egotistical people as were Mao and Stalin, they kind of canceled each other out. But after Stalin died and Mao was there thinking that, oh, well, I'm going to be able to ascend to the rightful throne as being the head of the communist movement, that was not the case.
Yeah, so that's some good clarification. Yeah, just reading about some of the power dynamics between those two, like you said, two very strong personalities in Stalin and in Mao. A lot of that stuff's very interesting. And you even see some of it again, like you said, when Khrushchev takes over after Stalin's death. They talk about in one of the books I was reading, when Mao went to meet with them, they had Khrushchev meet with Mao at Mao's swimming pool in the hotel that he was staying at, or the palace that he was staying at. And they're talking about just like the very slight power dynamics where like Mao wanted him to swim and Khrushchev didn't know how to swim or whatever. And so they had to put him in like basically like child floaties to have him in the pool. And they were talking about like how that little thing, they were just kind of like playing mind games with each other. So a lot of crazy power dynamics that were going on between the Soviet Union and China, like throughout this entire period. Although they were both communists, both of them very much, very, very strong personalities, which I think anybody can imagine in a government like that. If you're going to lead it, you probably have a very strong and stark personality. Mm-hmm. But yeah, appreciate that.
No, you're welcome. And then another thing I would like to point out, since you brought it up, was the 1979 Sino-Vietnamese War. That actually occurred during the time whenever the United States and everyone else was, especially the United States, was recognizing China and trying to enact relations. And so in a weird way, the United States gave its blessing to China to invade Vietnam because, payback.
Take care, my man.
Have a good one.
It's very inspiring to see you.
So it's very interesting to see that dynamic flipped around.
Yeah, I agree. I'm gonna forward just one slide really quick. So at the end of the article, Sino posed a question, right? And he talks about what some of these things could be. Obviously, I think we all know Taiwan claiming actual independence, on the world stage, like that is like one of those red lines that the PRC or has laid out that is going to be a problem. But I'd like to hear from some of the audience members. And again, I got the chance to read some of the feedback. Some people sent in some emails to the Lead the Minds Journal about their answer to this question. And some of those align with some of my thoughts too. And I'm willing to bring up some of my thoughts on the topic. Sina, I'm sure you can chime in, but before either of us do any of that, for anybody that's in the chat that would like to chime in, what are some of the factors that you think would trigger a PRC invasion of Taiwan? What do you think could actually lead to some of those things happening? I'd like to hear from anybody that's in there that would like to chime in and add. be surprised if nobody has an opinion.
Hey, this is Evan. In lieu of other people who are probably smarter than me chiming in, I just posit the idea that a U.S. government shutdown extending past 15 days with no possible end in sight between 2024 and 2030 being a key issue here. Over.
Good evening, gentlemen. This is Lance, and kind of in a similar vein to the previous gentleman. I see a potential corollary here with the events around the 2020 election and the fallout subsequent to that. I actually wrote a case study piece a while back about assessing the factors as to why Russia didn't kind of transition from creep to an active invasion at that point in time instead of later on, the later on 2 years after those events, at a time when, you know, our response would have been very fragmented and disabled by what we were going on or what we had going on in our own domestic sphere. So I think that, and this is completely apartisan, but the potential for a like event surrounding our upcoming election, and kind of almost having a playbook for a once in a lifetime or, you know, once in a couple decade event could also be a possible trigger.
So you think that that some kind of interruption in the United States government is a triggering event, and not to put any words in your mouth, but just to see how I interpret it, that some kind of interruption in the current flow or the regular flow of the government here in the United States is kind of a good opportunity in which China would capitalize on it. Is that how I'm understanding it?
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir. And that they see an
that's
opportunity
correct.
in time and space to react quickly.
Sana, do you want to chime in on that? How do you see that as something realistic, that China is essentially, you know, that they would capitalize on something like that, or do you think in your mind that they're looking for that gap or that window on the U.S. side? And I'd say I have my own opinions on that. I'm willing to share them in a second, but yeah, I want to see if anybody else has anything to say with regards to that.
I personally don't think that would be the case. If anything, they would be looking for whenever China or whenever the United States is willing to actually back into or willing to, you know, help Taiwan. I know this is kind of why would they do that kind of aspect? Well, one is to actually showcase to the world that it's a rejuvenated power. So that's the reason why you see these, you see the slogans for 2049 or the institute that's called 2049, or the institute, I believe. That's the reason why, because by that time they want to become a rejuvenated power. And so for them to take on Taiwan, even if they do try to invade, I think they would not utilize that as a key opportunity, just because they want to prove to the world that we're back and we are the middle kingdom, we are the middle country, not the United States, not anyone else.
Yeah, so I would kind of agree with you, Sana, to the extent that I don't see them looking as much at what the United States is doing or not doing as the critical inflection point that would lead to an invasion, as much as what their timeline looks like. I think they're much more married to what their capabilities are and knowing that they have some kind of definite overmatch capability where they feel confident as being the triggering mechanism more than the United States's internal conflict that it might be happening, at least in the next couple of years. So if we're talking about like election cycles and let's just say there's some kind of fallout after the next election in the next couple of years, I don't see that as a triggering function as much as maybe not this election cycle, but the following one for 4 or 5 years down the road. If they've met the criteria that they need, then if there's something, I could see them using that. I just don't see it happening in the next couple of years under our current election cycle that we're dealing with. I don't know that they're at that point, nor do I think that is the mechanism that they'd be looking at right now. I can understand the sentiment. It's just not my personal belief, at least.
No, I agree. It's one of those things in which a lot of people focus on the United States because they feel as if that would be one of the key factors, in which it's not really. China understands that the regime will change, or the United States regime or presidency will change between the Democratic or the Republican Party. It's going to be like that unless there's a random third party that just sweeps them both aside, which is unlikely. And so they understand that whatever they do, it won't really affect their timeline, even if they do have one. However, one presidency that will possibly affect this timeline is if is the 2024 election in Taiwan, because as you pointed out earlier, William Lai has been on record saying he would declare independence. Not even this past July. I'm talking about whenever he was a junior party member in the DDP back in the 80s, early 90s. That's actually one of the reasons why their hatred, the CCP's hatred towards Lai is more visual and more pronounced than it is to Tsai. Because Tsai never really said it as bluntly as Lai did.
Oh, well, one thing I'd ask is, during an election cycle, during campaigning specifically, it's kind of like a natural practice for those that are campaigning to say the most, like, take the most stark, stance on the hot topics that they possibly can, right? And so it is Vice President Lai kind of like taking this hard stance on independence to try and garner and gain the followership that President Tsai has, because he is a little bit less popular with regards to him maybe not being as much of a people person and not having the same appeal that President Tsai has. Is he kind of doubling down on the stance of independence to gain that followership? And do you think that he'd actually follow through on that if elected, or do you think he's really like about that, and that's kind of where he would actually go if elected? Because again, like you said, like, if the KMT won, that's a win for the PRC in their books, at least. If the DPP wins, that's bad news for them. But I just don't know how much we could place in those kind of comments right now, just because it is a campaign cycle right now, and the natural practice is to say, take the starkest opinion on certain topics.
Yes and no. I will point out that the elections in Taiwan are way different than obviously than the United States. They have an atmosphere to them that's more akin to a concert or rave. And so for Lai to come out and say, I can envision myself to become a U.S. president at this time, or enter the White House after I become president. To me, I think that was a Freudian slip in his mind, from his point of view, and the fact that there are some within the DDP who would very much like to declare independence. they were all, that's a very vocal minority. And so in a weird way that it may have been a Freudian slip, but also been trying to play up to that small but very influential element within the DPP. But for him, but I think, would he go through with it? I think it would take it would be more so an act of desperation on his and Taiwan's part. And I say that because we already are seeing we're already seeing a factor of the fact that China's pulling away their partners and the remaining partners or diplomatic allies with Taiwan. And so if Lai were to get elected, that will undoubtedly accelerate to the point to where they would not have any allies left. And so for the question for Lai then is that do I declare independence to save Taiwan? Because at that point it will be an act of survival then more so than any act of we want to envision ourselves as a world country.
Yeah, that's some good things to think about. I'm just looking over at the chat. I haven't caught up with all the messages because I was talking for most of it. But a couple of things in there. Carson point out that the recent history of Hong Kong is not doing any wonders for the CCP's offer of peace and reunification. That's definitely true. And then the question from Barish. What's the current polling in Taiwan right now? That's actually answered inside that CSIS podcast. Again, that's the CSIS China Power podcast that was published on August 31st. I don't want to misquote. Sino, I don't know if you know what the current polling standings are. I just remember that I want to say Lai was leading, but only by a fraction. And that there's basically two other people that are in the running right now. So there's the KMT, and then there is also a previous mayor of Taipei, although the KMT's nominee is a previous mayor of Taipei. There's a secondary one who's not part of the KMT. He's I guess an independent, if you label it as that. And he is a previous mayor of Taipei as well. He's like the third person. And then I think they're waiting to see I forget the name off the top of my head. I think I have it in my notes somewhere of a prominent.
There you go.
Yeah, the prominent Taiwanese businessman that they're waiting to see if Terry Gao is basically gonna hop in as that other wild card, which I guess he's got a lot of popularity in the fact that it's like if Elon Musk hopped in to be president or something like that, it'd garner a lot of support from certain areas.
I apologize, Chase.
No, you're good.
Chase, but yeah, he actually did join in. I want to say after that podcast actually came out.
Oh, really?
Yeah, he
So very
came
recent.
in.
Okay.
Oh yeah, like whenever everyone was debating, that was a very hot topic within Taiwan. Like, when will he come in? And it only drew the votes away from the KMT. At least that's what it seems, because Lai's still hovering around mid to low 30s, depending upon what poll you go with.
Yeah, somebody just threw in the current standings as of 6 September. So yeah, you can keep on going, but it has Lai in the lead at 35%, KMT behind at 17%, and then Mayor at 17.1%.
Yeah, it's funny because the Taiwan Progressive Party candidate Ko, he was actually above Hu there after his announcement, and that just shows that a lot of people are waking up. More like some are waking up to the fact that the KMT may not have the best interest at heart, as you pointed out in the brief in the class where the previous candidate Ma met with Xi Jinping and proposed an integration plan, which he actually, which China actually came out and said, here's the plan. Fairly recent, actually no, yesterday. They came out and they released a 31-point plan on how to integrate Taiwan directly with Fujian province. So it's very interesting to see. It's very interesting to see that plan come out. Even when Ho is having such a hard time, because he was dead last before Terry Gao came in. He was dead last. Like there was talk about removing him from the candidacy.
Who is that?
The KMT president, the KMT
Okay.
candidate.
Yeah.
They were actually
I know that they were talking about combining, like almost combining parties, so combining the two mayors just to get the, both of their, their supporters on board, almost as a last ditch effort.
Yeah, that did happen. I mean, there was talks about that, but the KMT, the head Alex Young, he shut that down because of the fact that he just didn't like what the other mayor Wu's stances were, because they would have had to, because if I believe he would have been the VP while Hao would have been the president. But at the end of the day, there were just too many. There were just the policies were just so different that they wouldn't have meshed, and people would have likely not voted for him.
Yeah. So just to kind of bring it back to the main discussion that we kind of posed and get away from the politics for a second, although politics are pretty interesting. Obviously, it's going to be a pretty interesting few months we have ahead of us. Honestly, the next year with all the election cycles that we have going, it's going to be a lot to talk about. But you do actually have a political will and a C2 article that's going to come out at the end of this. So in a couple months, we'll probably have a lot more to talk about, and it'll probably be more appropriately talked about inside of that group talk or group Zoom that we'll do. I see a lot of stuff that's coming through the chat right now. It's kind of hard to keep up with all of it. But I just want to I'll throw up my opinion on answering the question, right? So what are the factors that would trigger China to invade Taiwan? A couple of things that I think about. One, obviously, I don't see this happening in like the next year or anything like that, or 2 years. I already stated that, but the KMT not winning and the DPP therefore winning, and China kind of seeing it as, man, like, all right, we just lost another 4 years again. This is now slowing down and our ability to reunify in the sense that we want to. Xi Jinping has already stated that 2049 is kind of it's that 100-year mark where they want to have complete reunification. They want to be the hegemon. They want to hit a lot of markers, and this factors into that for sure. And that doesn't mean that they can just invade in 2048. They probably want to have all that stuff solidified and already done and over with by the time they get to 2049. So one thing that I really think would be an inflection point, and I don't know how realistic this is in the sense of looking at it today, but it could be something potentially in the future. And at least this is what I'm using in the science fiction book that I'm writing about this topic, is a weakened or threatened CCP regime, right? And threatened from within, as far as like with the civilian populace, and that could be from a decline in their market, their ability to provide for their people, all that stuff, create some turmoil within the within the PRC, and therefore the CCP is kind of threatened. And I know at this stage, very authoritarian in the sense that they can kind of control a lot of dissent, but I mark that as something that could be, that almost triggers an invasion of Taiwan as a last ditch effort to regain some kind of status with the CCP. And then I don't know how an aging Xi Jinping actually factors in that too. The guy's in his 70s. What does it look like when he is in his late 70s and he's coming towards the end of his life, right? And I don't know how much he wants to be the one that does the reunification. So I don't know how those two different things could factor in. And some can make the argument that those are pretty far fetched, but at the same time, I think there are things that could be considered at least. I saw a few people actually wrote in about some of those things too. So at least I'm not the only one with the crazy ideas, I think.
No, I agree with you, Chase, and those are actually very good and valid comments, because that could potentially happen. Because, because you have to understand the CCP has what's called an unwritten rule with the Chinese people, that we'll make you rich, we'll make you a middle class, we'll rejuvenate you, we'll give you the Chinese dream if you let us rule with an iron fist and get rid of these silly notions of democracy, human rights, treating your fellow man as decent people, etc. However, since the early 2010, you've actually seen this decline in the Chinese economy, where the Chinese miracle, as it was phrased, is no longer a miracle. In fact, it only accelerated to I would call it a nightmare or gloom during the COVID pandemic because of how Xi reacted to it. He didn't use science. He used communist philosophy to fight the virus, aka a people's war. It failed. It destroyed the economy. And then whenever people started complaining about it, he got so frustrated, he just decided, I can't shoot these people because the world will know. So I'm just going to let everything go by the wayside. And here you go. And while you did see the Chinese economy try to pick up after that, it's still faltering. It's very uneven. Not only that, but you have the real estate crisis that destroyed a large portion of the Chinese middle class's wealth, generational wealth, because that's actually how people gain wealth in China, is through owning apartments or condos.
Yeah, those are all actually topics that kind of factored into my thought around that is, what causes them to almost have a knee-jerk reaction in a sense, to feeling like they need to invade to kind of prove their prominence and prove that they're able to provide for their people and they're still, that ruling class. And that's kind of how I see that factoring in. See a lot of things that are coming through the chat again. Joseph, you talked about shifting the conversation to mainland China and the political climate. I think that answered some of it, right? Sino, I don't know if you can chime in maybe more. He says, what are the social atmospherics around the actual climate in the government right now? Let's see what else is in here. Within the past hour, the defense minister was reported to be under investigation. That's coming from Defense Bulletin. He also hasn't been seen in the public for the last few weeks. Somebody's talking about them purging a bunch of rocket force officers. I think I heard that a couple weeks ago as well. Let's see. Question from Shayla. This might be a dumb question, but wouldn't the CCP benefit from unrest from the election deadlock protests, increasing language regarding independence as a reason to invade established order? I mean, that's not a bad COA, right? If there's a lot of unrest, right? If there's a lot of unrest and a lot of I mean, you can shaping narrative, in my opinion, shaping narrative and using the ability to shape the narrative around why you're doing something is extremely powerful in this day and age. Whether anybody outside of China would fall for their narrative picture that they're going in to help Taiwan, I don't think anybody would fall for that as why they're doing it. I'm sure they can message that to their people in China, under their restricted information environment. But I don't think anybody's going to take that seriously unless they're already some type of partner or ally with China that they're going in there to do that. But absolutely, shaping a narrative is huge in this day and age. But I think more so shaping narratives covertly in the background through social media and things like that is more reasonable to think about. So I don't know if you can see the chat. People are asking some specific questions about some specific things. I don't know if any of them are in your realm to dive in on. And also, if anybody wants to unmute their microphone and kind of hop in and have like add into the conversation and do some back and forth. I'm not a China expert. I'm just a guy that's really interested in it and is willing to lead this conversation. But
so I guess going off from Michael's question about didn't they just purge a bunch of Rocket First officers? They did. This happened back in July. I actually wrote a paper, article about this, and what a lot of people miss whenever they talked about this was the fact that who she replaced the outgoing quote unquote head and the head commissars with. The head was the deputy commander of the People's Liberation Army or Army Navy. And the political commissar was replaced by a commissar from the Air Force. So that tells us something, that she wanted someone who he knew he could trust, because these officers actually knew she back when he was a party official back in Fujian province. Because from what little bios that they have on the Chinese internet, they've spent a large portion of their career in Fujian province and other areas, specifically around the time that she was actually in charge or in the area too. So they more than likely met. I would be more surprised if they didn't. And so that kind of tells me that he feels as if he could trust them. The other thing is that he may feel as if the Rocket Force still has too much corruption. You have to understand it's a fairly new organization created in 2016, and so she may feel as if, yes, the person I put in charge is one of my guys, but yet he came up through the 2nd Artillery Corps, but then also the Rocket Force. And so, can I really trust him? And plus, he's around. He may be a part of may have a power base, or be a part of the power bases that are dominated by Princeling, because the 2nd Artillery and the Rocket Force has always been seen as the domain of the Princeling class. A Princeling class is the officials, is the children who are born to senior PLA and Chinese Communist Party officials. She is actually one of them. And so he may want to purge them of that influence to make it bend to his will, if you will. Now, regarding Hu Jintao, he's still around. She did that little display of theatrics during the party congress, just to prove that he's in charge. That Hu Jintao and his Communist Youth Party faction, they have no power here, and that's the reason why. And he's still around. He's just keeping a low profile. In fact, a lot of the stuff coming out about Beta High conference and how senior party, or not senior but retired officials, admonished Xi and told him, you caused a lot of the issues within China. I would not be too surprised if Hu Jintao was one of the main people doing that, or may have had one of the main hands in that. You mute. Hey, Chase, you okay. Hello?
oh, was I muted the whole time?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah. So we're just over an hour. I just want to see if anybody actually wanted to chime in. You're welcome to unmute and kind of hop in or raise. We have a couple of hands raised, so we'll start with a defense bulletin. We'll take some stuff from some people in here, and then we'll close out. You feel free to hop out whenever you want to, but if you're in here and you want to talk, we'll start with the raised hands. Defense bulletin, if you want to hop in here, please.
Yeah, thanks. Thanks for running this class. Just a question for honestly anybody who, but mainly Sino Talk, about you guys mentioned on your timeline the third Taiwan Strait crisis, right? When Nancy Pelosi went to visit, they were firing off all these missiles. I noticed a lot of people, it kind of seemed like totally random. There was really no plan to it. But one thing I recognized, and specifically in some of the diagrams that they released as the exercise was going on, it seemed like they're trying to mimic what we call in the United States multi-domain operations. Using standoff land, ground forces, as well as naval forces to combine, to strike Taiwan, but also deter a U.S. response. Do we see them kind of trying to enhance this skill, or try and kind of do things better than just kind of raining down, multitudes of rockets onto an area, kind of like we see Russia use MLRS rockets for? Do we see the more planned response to this, or was that kind of just them attempting to, through diagrams, to mimic us? Or do we actually see them doing this in their exercises? Thank you.
So regarding the initial exercises that they conducted after Nancy Pelosi's visit, it was more along the lines of them wanting to showcase their displeasure with Taiwan, but also the United States. And they utilized a very interesting aspect to do it, like the rockets, the missiles. I think that was more them trying to enact or simulate a blockade operation to actually blockade or rope off Taiwan from the war, because they know that Taiwan Silicon Manufacturing Company produces a large segment of the world's chips, and I want to say 4 to 5 factories on Taiwan. And so just from them, so they understand if they were just to do that, they have a lot of economic impact. And the actual exercise did. We've seen that. And another thing is the fact that they're pushing past the middle boundary. That for so long that China and Taiwan actually had a de facto agreement saying that we agree to this, that this is the demarcated border. We won't go past. China won't go past it. Taiwan won't go past it. We'll leave that alone. Now you see China just totally disregarding it, and in fact heading to the 12-mile outer limit of Taiwan. So you see you see them slowly escalating. Would I call it them trying to imitate multi-domain operations? Yes, but with caveats. I would say that it's their starting process. We may see variations of this, in which we have, but we may see them add more domains as time goes on. Yeah.
Yeah, can I chime in?
Yeah, I mean, yeah.
Yeah, please.
Okay. Yeah, sorry, I just wasn't sure if that stoppage was like just me dropping connection. Sorry. My research interests are actually more related to Sino-Indian border disputes and how that's accelerated under President Xi in the last 10 years or so. But I guess it's also an extension of the insecurity that I guess the Chinese, security apparatus feels in general. At least that's how I interpreted it. But I was wondering, with, I guess, a change in international politics, at large, with the expansion of the BRICS that recently occurred at a meeting in, I want to say India it was in, earlier this month or in August or so, where they're bringing in more countries. They're trying to expand that sort of, I don't know, sphere of influence, I guess, if you want to call it that, even though it's not exactly defined as a sphere geographically. I was wondering how the current changes in international politics might embolden the Chinese to say, well, you know what, maybe, in a decade or so past, it might have been very, costly diplomatically and politically to, say invade Taiwan. But now the Chinese government, the government in Beijing, I should say, has so much more clout with the world at large that, in 2014 or 2016, whatever it was, when Russia annexed Crimea, everyone said, well, the world is against Russia, but really the only states that voted against it at the United Nations was NATO members and EU members. Everyone else in the world either abstained or voted no. I was wondering if there might be a similar context there, or sort of a parallel there in the United Nations, since China is so much more involved in the rest of the world, has so much more diplomatic clout than even Russia did back then. If that makes invasion of Taiwan more politically feasible in the international domain. Thank you.
You're welcome. I don't think so, because China will go in. I mean, they've disregarded international agreements before. The most notable was the 2016 UN ruling on the law of the sea, where it said China's claim of the entire South China Sea was null and void. China actually said, we don't accept this because it's not what we wanted. And so I think for them, if they do decide to go invade Taiwan, they wouldn't really much care for what the international community says, because at that point it would be their burning of the Rubicon. And then regarding India and China's dispute along the border, I don't ever see that ever going away unless one party kowtows or gives up territory, in which both will not, because of nationalism. Not only that, but China also will be more hesitant to give India any land because of their support to the Tibetan government in exile. Because any land that they could give, that they could give to India for any land swap, would more likely be used to house the government in exile, push them more towards their land, if you will, and not have them in northern India proper. Carson, I guess.
Hey, how's it going? You guys hear me all right? Or I guess screaming at the void if not. But I was a political science major in college, so I just have a lot to think about. But I was in Guam last summer, so seeing like the drills, that was kind of crazy. I'm a Navy JO, so the whole like rocket force thing's pretty personal. But I don't know. One of the things that I kind of have been thinking about a lot is like she's the first Chinese president, like paramount leader, to like actually be the chair of the Central Military Commission as well. So that was kind of one of the things that kind of led me to believe that he might be the guy to make that call to forcefully reunify with Taiwan. And then just like the kind of the game, I think it was mentioned earlier, but the idea of like failing Chinese economics being a sword, like a reason why the conflict kind of pops up. and just this like idea of like nationalism that kind of Xi's been moving towards, where he took the kind of like the philosophy of Chinese communism and kind of moved it more towards Chinese nationalism, kind of that being like the hot potato he's playing with, and whether or not that might be the catalyst. Like that's what I'm thinking about for bigger conflict.
I think regarding Xi being in charge of the Central Military Commission, that really doesn't really matter because that's always been a thing with Chinese leaders. They've always been in charge of the CMC and the General Secretary of the CCP and the President of China. But no one really cares about the presidency because it's more of a ceremonial role at that point. So for Xi to decide, it will very much be Xi's decision, regardless if he was head of the CMC or if he wasn't head, because of the fact that he's also the head of the Chinese Communist Party. Because at the end of the day, the PLA is controlled by the CCP. So in that aspect, he could say, I want to go in and invade Taiwan, and whoever is in the post of or heads the CMC, they could just say, all they could really say is like, yes, sir, we'll get on it.
Yeah, no, I wasn't trying to make a structural argument there. I was just trying to say that, like, I think he's taking a particular interest more so than previous Chinese leaders.
Oh, yes, he is. And the reason why is because he feels like he's the one to bring about the great rejuvenation of the Chinese party, or of China. That's how he feels. And also, he's a true believer in the CCP, which is ironic given his background, especially when he grew up during the Cultural Revolution.
Paris, if you want to chime in real quick, and then Joseph, I know you got an admin question. We'll admin question. We'll wrap it up.
Yeah. Once again, sorry about earlier. My microphone was on. I apologize, but I really appreciate you guys taking time to do this. But one question I had was regarding the Fujian plan that was announced to try to increase integration between that province and Taiwan's Kinmen Islands. I know in 2024, a big issue in Taiwan is going to be the economy, which is expected to see a slowdown, I think, as we get closer to January of next year. And that China is trying to use like its economic relations with Taiwan to try and influence a more pro unification, pro status quo candidate to win the election. So my question is, if this Fujian plan is implemented and manages to create some economic benefits for those provinces, how much of an impact we see involving in the 2024 election? Like, do you think it could give the KMP a sudden surge in the polls, or it's unlikely?
It's unlikely. I mean, the plan as I've seen it, it involves the entirety of Taiwan. I don't know if they changed it from then, but if anything, well, let me first say this. If it did involve only Kinmen Island, there would be very little impact that it would have on the wider election, because Kinmen and the surrounding islands have always been more aligned to the KMT versus the DPP. And so for them to actually do this and it would have like a major impact on the election, not really. But now going back, if they do decide to implement this plan, or if they try to push this plan upon Taiwan, I could see them actually backfiring on them, because like all the other plans that they have, like the exercises, they increase the meetings with Ma and the other KMT officials, this backfiring, because a large portion of the Taiwanese population understands that a two-party system like Hong Kong is unattainable, because they've seen what happened at the end of the day. Um,
Joseph, if you want to chime in with whatever question you had.
Yeah, hey, how you doing, Gunny? I'm you can call me Joe. I'm Joe Fantazzi. I'm a GW grad student. I'm kind of a last minute addition. Do you guys have you guys are referencing articles? Is there a link or something that where I can grab that information?
Right.
So
Yeah. Are you on Instagram?
I am, yeah.
Okay. If you go to, well, you can either go to Lethal Minds and then just go to their, they have it linked under some of their more recent posts that are about this Taiwan, the war game that we're doing or the series that we're doing. Also, if you're part of my Instagram, the Quantico Warfighting Society, in my bio is three links, but one of the links is to the article and one of them is to this Zoom that we're doing right now. So if you just go there, it'll take you straight to the article that Sinotalk wrote. Or if you just start following in the Lethal Minds Instagram, they put it out as well.
All right, got it. I'm looking at it right now. Thank you.
Okay. Yeah, awesome. So for the rest of y'all, we had a pretty good audience today. Appreciate everybody coming out. Appreciate everybody giving the article a read and being interested in this and coming out to participate. Definitely looking forward to over the next couple of months having the next 4 or so articles roll out. And we're going to try and get some special guests on this Zoom call that have some expertise in certain areas. So we're looking at people. We already have a couple of people in mind, but some people that have some real expertise from the US side in some of these areas to kind of come in and supplement and add another level of depth to the conversations that we're going to be having. So really looking forward to hopefully getting some more of you all out here in the next ones and continue to spread the word. Hopefully we can just get more people interested in this, talking about this, because this is, I mean, a very important topic for everybody, especially in the military and political sphere, which I'm assuming most of us are. So looking forward to the future. And if you have anything in the interim, please feel free to reach out to Sinotalk on Instagram, myself at Quantico Warfighting Society on Instagram, and then the Lethal Minds Journal. We'd be happy to have conversation with you offline and talk about this in depth and really answer any of your questions. But other than that, thanks for coming out. Looking forward to talking to you all in the future. Bye.